Uh, we're going to start at the 7th verse of the 12th chapter of Romans. The tendency of people reading Romans is to read the theological parts of Romans. And then when he gets to the practical part, like he does when he starts in the 12th chapter with a therefore, they just kind of hurry through that. I get the distinct impression from reading all of Paul's epistles that he would be horrified at that the theological part is his preface to the practical part. One of the things that new readings of Paul that have been done in the last 35 or 40 years, they've realized that Paul was very much interested in the churches as churches, that he, for a long time, people read Paul as if, you know, he was a great theologian, but when they got down to what you might call ecclesiology, that is his teaching about the nature of the church, they just kind of ignored it. But I think Paul would have thought differently. His work in all of his epistles is to keep the church unified and to teach the church that there should be no socioeconomic differences, that we ought to eliminate socioeconomic categories in talking about the church. Of course, in the first century, the greatest division was between Jew and Gentile. It was radically different for somebody to come along and say Jews and Gentiles are saved by the Jewish God on the same basis, and that there should be no difference between them. Because from both the Jewish and the Gentile perspective, they could not conceive of being in one community. Now, see, we have in this country become far too individualistic. We think in terms of the individual. When you hear people say, you know, it's better that 100 criminals go free than that one innocent individual suffer. That sounds good, especially when defense lawyers make that statement. But what if the person that goes free is a serial killer? Or a sexual predator? It brings it in question. I don't have any quick answers for that, but what I'm trying to get at is we concentrate on the individual. Paul lived in a culture for whom the family and the society were important. A lone person in the Roman Empire had a terribly rough life and probably a fairly short one. You needed a group of people to be part of a community. Rome dealt with people more on the basis of communities than they did as individuals. It's hard for us. So when Paul is talking about the church, he's telling his converts that now you have a different community, a different social community that you ought to be a part of, contributing to, and cultivating. And that makes some of the things he says very hard for us individuals to understand. But keep in mind, Paul was very much oriented toward the church as a living community that supported its members, were available in time, effort, and money to its members, who you could go to in times of trouble, even if you were running from the law when it became illegal to be a Christian. They would hide you at the risk of their own life. And we need to recover a great deal of that. In this modern world, if we don't like something in one church, what do? We just pack up our bags and go to another one. And that's not the way Paul saw the church. He wanted them to be, because remember, the church that Paul is writing to existed literally in little house churches, 20 to 30 maybe people. And the church at Ephesus would rarely, if ever, get the whole church together. We know in Corinth that the whole church did come together, because he gives instructions about when the church comes together. And that's what he's talking about. But you know the old fish symbol that you see on the back, it's just a kind of loop. So when somebody went to a new community, and a Christian, we have descriptions of this in the post-New Testament writers. They would use the toe of their sandal and just draw that fish symbol. And it would, that means in Greek, the letters of that form Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior.
And in the ruins of Ephesus, there are still those symbols in the stones.
Yes.
On the main road coming what was the bay.
Yes. And so they would just reach their toe of their sandal down, make that, and if the other person was a Christian, they would make it also. And so if they weren't, then you just, kind of move around and erase that and hope they didn't know the secret. So that wherever you were, church membership meant something. And that's it. We need to return to that idea that even if we differ on theological points, if I would have been a mind to, I could have raised some questions about Randy's sermon this morning. But I'm not going to do it, because I know that his interpretation of it is a consistent and possible meaning. I would just raise some other possible meanings. I'm not criticizing him. I want you to go think I'm in. But he and I are good brothers in this church, in spite of the fact that there's times I can question him. There's a few times that I can do that with Max, and have.
But isn't that what you're here for?
Well, in a sense, yes. That's what I'm on the church payroll for, is to answer questions. But what I'm getting at is, Paul would say, bear with one another. Be patient. And you know what? I'm going to give you a good modern American translation of be patient. Put up with. Now, does that communicate?
Sure.
Okay.
Crystal.
That's exactly, the Greek word hupomeno means to live under. That is, live under the conflict with other people.
And that actually is an attribute of God that we are supposed to be reflecting. It's
It-
not just because we have to stay together, but we have to stay together to show God's faithfulness. Because
Yes.
we have conflicts with God, and He still stays faithful to us. So we're supposed to reflect that in the church by staying faithful to this congregation, even though they can annoy the heck out of us.
Yeah, that's, annoyance is no reason, no valid reason for divorce or going to another church.
We had a friend that preaches there, he's on staff at Richland Hills, and he goes, you know, preaching would be a great job if you didn't have to put up with the people. And that's,
God feels the same
you
way.
would-
God, yes,
Exactly.
yes, I think God would say the same thing about His creation.
It's a neat idea, but.
Yeah.
So, I want you to realize that the importance of these chapters 12, 13, 14, and over into 15, and perhaps even in 16, that this was the part of the letter that Paul was practically interested in. And it ought to speak to us the same way it spoke to them. Now, we have differences in this class, don't we? You could hear them quite often. But we are still a body of believers working together, loving and accepting each other. It's one thing I love about this class. When we get everybody that's back from vacation back, we will have people from radically differing backgrounds. We have a Japanese family that are really vital part of this class. We have others who have different backgrounds. And yet,
I miss them.
what?
I miss them.
I do too. And that's what we ought to do. But let's get back to this. The 7th verse says, if our gift is prophesying. Now, when I redo this, which I'm just about ready to do, I will change this in some way. Because try as I might, if you use the word prophesy, people are going to think about predicting the future. In fact, if you go to a dictionary of American English, that is the first and sometimes the only definition that you will get. And it just brings that out. That's not what it meant. It never did mean that. It means to bring a message from God to the people of that time. It is where the supernaturalness comes in. It is a message from God concerning behavior of God's people. Either an approval, a warning, a threat, or just information.
It's an apt message.
What?
An apt message.
Yes, and it's kind of hard to think of words that will convey that without making the passage much too long. I'm going to search for them. But he says, if it is prophesying, let us devote ourselves to prophesy. That is, if your gift was to listen to God for information the church needed, then concentrate on that. This is a conclusion or result of Paul's idea that we're all one body. And the church then needed, because they did not have a New Testament, they did not have a source of listening to the teaching of Christ. They didn't have Gospels. So they needed somebody who could tell them about their behavior. Does God approve of it? Does God disapprove of it? What does God want us to do? Does He want us to send out missionaries, or shall we concentrate on our own body here? And it filled a need. Now, this is one of what we usually call the spiritual gifts, the charismatic gifts that come from the Holy Spirit. In our situation here, we don't need prophets. But I want to emphasize something. Some people who are really strong against the charismatic type approach will say, well, we don't need prophets. We don't in this situation. But suppose you were a lonely house church in central China. And I am not one that's going to tell God, well, you can't send him any message because the age of prophecy has gone. What?
Watchman Nee.
Yeah, so I leave that open. Now, I have never known a prophet in the sense of this. But what I have never heard doesn't limit the power of God to act like He thinks needs to be. Okay? I've seen some healing as a result of prayer. I've seen some really miraculous things. And so I can witness to that. If somebody, I could do that. But I cannot, I have to leave the matter of prophecy open. Okay, if our gift is serving others, let us devote ourselves to serving them. Now, what is the practical result of this? If you have a gift for putting yourself on the line to help people, I'm not talking about just financially or anything. I've known some people who could go into somebody's sick room and make them feel better. My son, I remember, Mine and I were in Mexico City on a vacation, and our son-in-law had a severe industrial accident. He did something that he knew was stupid about a microsecond too late. He reached across a spinning lathe to make an adjustment, and the lathe caught his shirt sleeve and slung him over the lathe against the wall. And it broke his left arm here. Now, that is a horrible place to have a break. You cannot put a cast on it. So what they do, they hang it like this, and you've got to stay still enough for the bone to heal. And he was in bad pain. And we came back a day early and went to Houston. And he was lying in bed, and he was obviously in pain and it wasn't good for him. They were giving him about all the medication that they thought he could stand. And our son, who is a registered nurse, he's a little better than 6 feet tall, weighs 175 pounds. He's got hands almost big enough to span the back, and he came in, and he, with his powerful muscles and his gentleness, he just did something to the bed and the pillow. And David got immediate relief from it. It's what makes him a good nurse. He did it with his own mother back last December when she was bedridden with tremendous pain. He has that gift. So if that's what you have, concentrate on it. There's enough suffering in the world. There's enough people that need to be served that you're not going to run out of opportunities. In fact, if you really understand that you're serving others is what your gift from God is, you're going to have to actually be very careful about how much you take on. You can wear yourself out. That may not be too bad a thing, but when if you're no longer available, you can't serve people. At the risk of embarrassing Alicia has the gift of serving others, and she serves this class extremely well. Now, don't tell her I said that. Okay, all right. But that, it's just good to have a concrete example. Oh, now, he goes ahead to say, if our gift is encouraging others, let us devote ourselves to encouraging them. Now, people have told me that I have a gift of encouragement. I'm not aware of it. I just tell people what it seems they want to know about their situation. When I see somebody, I know that I made a New Year's resolution 30 or more years ago, one of the few I ever kept. My idea was that if I know something good about somebody, I'm going to tell them. And if that may be what Paul means by encouraging others. And I've made some delightful contacts. I wrote a congressman one time and got a very effusive letter back from him. He said, Charles, you're the first person that ever said something good about what I did. He said, if I make a mistake, I get hundreds of letters. But he said, if I do something good, people are silent. And we carried on a correspondence for several years. I think he's dead now, but that's just what. So there's a practical thing I want to put in right now. What is the practical meaning of this for us? What should we be doing in order to answer and fulfill this passage?
If we see how we are part of a body and that we have a purpose for being in that place,
Okay, all right,
how
but
we
now,
express that.
that's good, that's what he says. But I'm talking about what do we need to do right now. You're going to think it's so obvious that,
Find
Find
what
your
you're.
yes, and how do we do that?
Okay,
Pray.
That's right. It's one of those things. Remember, Jesus says in I think it's Luke 11, he said, how much more will the Heavenly Father give the Spirit to them that ask for it? And God is the one who has gifted you. And now, how is he going to answer that? according to who you are, but I have every confidence in the world that eventually God will answer that prayer. And it may come from just a dawning recognition. It may come through other people who say, you sure are good at that. But basically, this ought to cause us to pray that God will reveal to us His purpose for us. Okay, Jesse?
In working in call centers that I have for the past 8-10 years now, and going to different jobs, the first thing they tell you, listen to what the person's asking.
Yes.
Pay attention. Actively listen. And in a sense, that's all we have to do for each of us around us, is actively listen, pay attention to what
Yes, that, based on my experience, which is my experience and therefore fairly limited, even though I know a lot of people, and that is that most often the answer comes out of what other people tell us. That, as I say, that's just my personal experience. I know that other people have gotten other ways. But that's what we need to do is we need not just to read this and comprehend it as a theology or Bible teaching. It needs to become real in our lives. As I've shared with you, I am absolutely sure that God has called me to be a teacher. And as a result, I love to teach because it feels so right with God. There's a lot of things that I'm not good at. I'm not good at one-on-one conversion because I'm just not good at it. Now, over a period of time teaching, I have accomplished the same thing. But just to do that, I have failed miserably. Remember, when I was preaching in Houston, we had a pretty formal way of doing that. We got some material, and we'd share that with us. So I got a call from a dentist's wife. And I was sure it was in response to these ads and things we had put out. So I got all my equipment and I went to her house and I started showing it to her. And after a few minutes she says, but preacher said, that sounds good, but said, my husband is seeing another woman. See, I didn't listen to her. And I said, oh, so I put my stuff away. And over a period of time, we were able to work with the couple. And when I left there, they were both had been baptized and were members of that congregation. But see, I didn't listen. So that's going. Okay. If your gift is encouraging others, let us devote ourselves to encouraging them. If our gift is giving to the needy, let us give only for the purpose of helping them. Now, Paul has slightly changed in some of these things. He's talking about the motive for doing it. See? And we have an elder's wife who is retired from the staff that was one of the best people I have ever seen, and she still does it. She could make sure that when she was in charge of disbursing several tens of thousands of dollars a year. In fact, David Robinson wrote out a check for several tens of thousands of dollars. And the stipulation was it be, I don't mind telling you, it was Dorothy Bagley. And it was specifically given to the church for her to use. And she was the best at it I've ever seen. She didn't just give money. You know, you can throw money at problems and you make the problem worse sometimes. But she made sure that the help was for their benefit.
It really met their need.
Yes, and their benefit overall, not just to pay a gas bill or electric bill or something like that, but that they were better people and closer to God as a result of it. Now, she didn't just buy their belief. She knew enough about human behavior that she used helping them as a method of teaching and bringing them closer to God.
It was her ministry.
And that's what Paul is talking about here. If you are giving, if your gift is giving to the poor, make sure that it helps them as a person. You're not just help paying their bills. You want them to become a better person, living more closely to God. Now that's a horse of an entirely different color. And so
Charles,
yes.
Where did the idea of secular and sacred come in, and the two don't mix? Was that evident at this point? Is that why?
No, it came into the Western world at what we call the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment philosophers wanted to eliminate the influence of the medieval Catholic Church on society. And so they sold the bill of goods that, you know, there's a religious life and that's for individuals.
That was their better idea.
Yeah, that's where our individualism came from. Not from the Bible, but from Enlightenment philosophers. And that's where it came from. A lot of N.T. Wright's material is undoing the damage that the Enlightenment did to Western thinking. And that's where it came from. Okay. If our gift is to be a leader, let us do so with the single purpose of benefiting them. Now, I'm going to change that them because it's what it is. It means benefit those you're leading. Now, this is one that's very subtle, but very often misused. I wrote an article for the Crossings years ago about toxic religion. And toxic religion is practiced by many church leaders because they benefit themselves from their leadership. And Paul says, no way. You lead people for their benefit and not yours. And that's, I'm going to tell you, that's one of those subtle things. I remember telling a class one time that the most dangerous 2 feet in the world was the 2 feet that most preachers are elevated above their congregations. And I always felt that also, I don't ever come to this class without thinking about it. That is, I've got to be for the benefit of the people I'm teaching. If I start making myself feel good because, well, here I am, up here, and I know more than you. So what?
You don't
I've been at it
pontificate.
longer.
You don't pontificate.
What?
You don't pontificate.
No, and I'm always have been very conscious of the fact that as a leader, it's so easy to fall into the grinding your own axe, making sure it benefits you. And one way that you keep from doing that is you concentrate on other people. What you were talking about, listening to them. See, that's what listening to other people, that's what the way you learn what they need. That's the way you get the idea that this is what they need, not what I need, but what they need. Now that doesn't mean that you always give people what they want. There's a difference between what a person needs and what they want. If you ever had kids, you know that that's very true, and it's true of grown-ups too. Okay, if our gift is in showing mercy, let us do so with cheerfulness. Here's one that we don't think much of, but to show mercy, what does that mean to you? Anybody?
Forgiveness.
What?
Forgiveness.
That is one of the ways we show mercy. I think it is probably the primary thing that Paul had in mind here.
Long suffering,
What?
long suffering. There's in mercy.
Yes,
you-
I'm not sure that's the central idea,
No,
but
okay.
I think did,
First word that comes to my heart is compassion. Compassion.
compassion. Yes.
Well, I think you have to set aside your judgment. It has to come from a non-judgmental place, I think, to show mercy. Because it's almost like in spite of,
Okay.
I'm not
I've
phrasing
got-
it very well.
I think all of these are in the constellation of ideas that Paul has in mind here. And notice, a lot of us show mercy in helping or showing compassion, all of these things. But we do it in a kind of holier than thou sort of a way.
It shouldn't be, I told you so.
Yeah.
You ought to know better.
Yeah.
Well, in the context, it would be something, mercy would be something that there's possibility of on the other side of that, the one that's gonna show mercy being kind of unhappy or not being 100% for it, There's
Yes.
a self-serving part of that.
Yes, here's the thing. The idea, here but for the grace of God go I. One
Well,
of
what about
the,
the idea of just as I am, or just as the other person is? I mean, Christ shows us mercy every minute of every day, just as we are.
okay, I always think about the passage in one of the 6th chapter of Matthew where he's talking about when you do good, you ought to model yourself on the Father, because the Father sends his rain on the good and the bad,
Right.
and he sends sunshine on the good, on the evil and the good. He said, and in a passage that is so often misunderstood and misinterpreted, Therefore be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. In other words, you do good to the person, what they need, without judging whether they are right or wrong. And friends, that is extremely difficult to do.
We have that ledger.
And what it is, we think we're being like God to judge them. But Jesus says that's not the way God works. And what it means is I see the human being. I don't see either their good actions or the bad. I see somebody that has a need, a real need. If a person is hungry, they're hungry. Now, they may be some old reprobate. I remember when we first moved back here in '91, I was part of a group that we formed to go down and minister to the Sam's ministry for homeless people. And one thing I emphasized to my group was that don't look at these people down your long bony nose. Look at their needs. And would even when we would have a prayer, I'd lead a prayer that God help us to see the humanity, the shared humanity. And people, the people that were there, homeless, responded to that very well. And we did it until I got to where I couldn't walk upstairs. Finally had to quit it. But that's what he's talking about here. All right, now we have a change of pace, but not as great as you might say. He stops talking about gifts and starts talking in more general terms. That is, in this section we just finished, he was talking to individual groups in the church. Now he's talking to the whole church. Love without hypocrisy. What does that mean to you? I'm trying to I put you to sleep by talking too much. I want to wake you up a little bit.
Well, that would be like, you know, okay.
If you just go with the two words, love and hypocrisy, love truly, not artificially faking.
Yeah. What does it mean to love somebody? This word is agape.
Put them first.
Well, that may be a result. I'm talking about I'm actually asking you to define not hypocrisy, agape love. Alicia?
To love a person is to love them warts and all, and that is to accept them as they are, not look down on them disdainfully, but saying that you love them.
Yeah. Okay.
Expecting nothing in return. That's
Yeah.
the last half of that phrase.
Yes. Agape love is the willed commitment to the well-being of another person, regardless of how you happen to feel about them.
Yes.
That is the love that God had for us. You know, we talk about God loving us, but you know, God didn't like us.
He got rid of all but 8 people when he didn't.
Yeah, all kinds of things indicate that. But God committed himself to our well-being. And that, see, sometimes we love someone and we say, I love you, for our own purposes. It's not the person, it's what we get in return, or expect to get in return. And that's what he's talking about. That in the church, love one another means that I put myself out for you as you are. You said, who said warts and all? You're right. Oh, Alicia, yes. And that's what it means, that you really have in mind their well-being. This is very hard. Most people think of love in the sense that the Greeks would use eros for. Now, eros is not just erotic in the physical sense. Eros is the love that makes you feel good to give and to receive. When you kiss your baby on the top of the head, that's eros. There's nothing erotic about it, but it makes you feel good and the baby feel good. That's the best definition of eros that I can get.
Well, Clint Black wrote a great song, and one of the lines is, "Love is not something you say, it's what you do."
Yes,
So,
yeah. And
sums it
it not only it's what you do, it's why you do it
up. Right.
that he's talking about here.
Not self-serving.
Yes, not self-serving.
Hypocrisy is English, but what did the Greek word mean?
The Greek word is hypokrites. And that was the word that meant, have you ever seen the two faces of Greek drama? One shows happiness and the other shows sadness. Okay, those false faces were called hypokrites. It means putting something over your face.
And you know, I know Paul here has been talking about those who need mercy, those who need help from us. But I think we're just as hypocritical about people who don't. You know, I've been in churches where, a member of churches where I think they would have helped and been more tolerant of a homeless person who walked in than they would a person who was well-educated and well-dressed. You know, because they judge them immediately as not being Christian enough,
Yeah.
without even getting to know
Yeah.
what they're like.
James had something to say about that. And he was in the same pew as Paul was in that. Yes, I always like to share with people that, because most of us have seen those two faces. And that's where you got your word hypocrite from. It's almost a transliteration of the Greek word, and it means to hold. Now, see, actors in Greek plays would have those faces on a stick, and if you were playing a happy character, you held that up over your face, and everybody knew that's part of your act. And so, to not be a hypocrite
Your
means,
shtick.
huh?
Your shtick.
No, that's Yiddish. But when you know that, you know just about all that you need to know about what the word hypocrisy means. He goes ahead to say, instead be married to what is good. Now that is a literal translation of what Paul says. And if you are married, what does that mean?
Committed.
It means, well, think about the passage where Jesus quotes when he's talking about what marriage is and why divorce is wrong. What does he say?
Two become one.
They shall be what?
Become one.
Come on.
One flesh.
One flesh.
Okay, so this is a way of saying that you are one with goodness. That's really what you are. Do you follow me on that?
And have chosen and have chosen and vowed to do so?
What?
Is that also, and you have chosen and vowed to do so?
That may be pushing it a little bit, Jesse, but not much, because Paul would say that it is something you have chosen to be. Remember, we talked about when one becomes a believer and a Christian and part of the body of Christ, and all, we've gone over that one of the changes is that our choices really make us different. If you're not a Christian and don't have the Spirit, your choice doesn't make you different. If you have the Spirit of God and you choose good, then the Spirit will help you do that. And so it's not automatic, but it's a choice, and that's the reason I said choice does enter into it. Be affectionate in your love for your fellow believers. Now, this is different. This is not agape love. Agape love is that love that's commanded and that's a matter of choice. Now, but affection is phileo in Greek, and it means to feel kindly disposed toward. Now, Paul evidently thinks that that's a choice too, because he puts it here in the imperative mood, and it's a command, so that you can. Now, this is something you work at. I have found if you start loving people agape, it becomes easier and easier to like them, which is what affection means. You know, I have started out with people when I just had to grit my teeth and say, I'm going to work for your good. But over a period of time, as I got to know them and understand them and maybe do good for them, I got to where I like them. And that's what Paul is saying, is that ultimately we need to be joined to our fellow believers in the church by liking, by affection. Now, it don't happen overnight. I think about Mila and me. When I first knew her, when she was 10 years old and I was 12 years old, neither one of us could stand the other. Because she punctured my little self-satisfied balloon. She could deflate my ego very easily. Okay, our time is up.